Okay team, today we're going to talk about kVp. That's right, kilovolt peak, and its relationship to contrast. So, to start with, what do the Detroit Red Wings, Timmy's Time Machine wheelchair, and conjoined fetal twin syndrome have in common? Any guesses? Any guesses? No guesses. Okay, we'll get back to that later. Now, kVp is good, okay? There's an inverse relationship between kVp and radiographic contrast, but we'll get into that later, okay? First, we have to understand what kVp is. By definition in radiography, kVp is the highest energy reached by a given X-ray beam. The voltage is measured in kilovolts, which means if the kVp value is 75, then 75,000 volts is the potential difference between the cathode and the anode. The peak part of the kVp corresponds to the maximum keV, or kiloelectron volts, of the electrons in the tube stream, okay? And it is seen on the far right of this graph, okay? Now, keV is the measure of energy of one electron as it passes through 1 volt of potential difference. But we don't really need to care about that, okay? What we need to care about is that kVp is the determining factor of the kinetic energy of the electrons accelerated across the tube, okay? And the peak energy of the X-ray emission spectrum, okay? Now, the kVp is generated in the X-ray generator by converting 220 volt power into high voltage potential through first an auto transformer and then a step-up transformer in the generator by the process of mutual induction. The current finally runs through a step-down transformer to complete the circuit. There are various generator types and some are more efficient than others, okay? So this high voltage that is induced is applied through the X-ray tube when the exposure is made by depressing the button at the X-ray console. When the kVp is applied at the moment of exposure, it propels the space charge of electrons created by the filament from the cathode to the anode. Now, the higher the kVp, the faster the electrons move in the tube current, okay? So, the higher the kVp is, the faster the electrons are moving, okay? And the faster the electrons are moving, the greater the number of X-rays that get produced when the electrons strike the anode, okay? So, the higher the kVp, the higher the energy of the X-rays becomes, and the more energy the X-rays have, the more penetrability they have too. So, the better the penetrability of the X-ray beam, the more transmission of X-rays to the image receptor, okay? The basic relationship is the lower the kVp level, the higher the image contrast, and the higher the kVp level, the lower the image contrast is, okay? The reason for this inverse relationship is when the kVp is low, the X-ray energy is also low. This means that most of the X-rays get absorbed into the tissue due to photoelectric effect as they pass through the patient. This leaves a deficiency of X-rays reaching the image receptor and creates an image with only the most basic black and white short scale contrast instead of a balanced grayscale. Here's an example of a soft beam. Just like those punches are being stopped by Ike's head, that is how all the energy gets absorbed in the patient when there isn't enough energy in the X-ray beam. There is no transmission. Nothing is getting through. Conversely, when the kVp level is pushed very high, there is excellent penetration, and the resulting radiograph displays an abundance of Compton scatter produced inside the patient by the higher beam energy. The large amount of fog created by the scatter lowers the image contrast considerably, okay? This produces a radiograph that is just varying shades of gray without the definable whites and blacks of the high contrast image. Here is an example of a hard, fast beam. You see how it goes right through Kenny's head? That's real penetration. And you see how the blood sprays? That is just like all the extra scatter that gets produced when the kVp is high. So here's an example of what a low contrast radiograph looks like. Note the ample amount of fog due to increased scatter production of high kV penetrating a thick body part, okay? And here's what a high contrast radiograph looks like. Notice the black and white image without much grayscale? That is the lack of penetration of the X-ray beam due to low kVp registering at short scale contrast. So, how do we pick the right kVp for the right kind of contrast, for the right situation, to achieve optimal contrast and make the optimal radiograph? There are two main things to consider, okay? The thickness of the anatomical part to be examined, and the densities and types of tissues the beam is going to pass through, okay? The first consideration is the thicker the anatomical part, the more kVp need to penetrate it. It may be that you will start with 55 kVp for a finger, but on a knee, which is much thicker, you may use 75 kVp or more, okay? So, if you're ever parachuted into Saipan and have to run a field x-ray unit, and you don't have a manual or a Merrill's with you, and you need to figure out the kVp settings, you can always use Sante's rule. The rule is to double the thickness of the patient anatomy measured in centimeters, add the SID in inches, and you get a ballpark starting point for your kVp setting. The other main consideration in choosing a kVp setting is tissue density. Variations in tissue density will lead to variations in X-ray transmission and contrast. So it's important to factor in the difference in transmission allowed by different tissue types. This difference in densities can very much come into play in chest radiographs where there is a good deal of difference between, say, lung density and thoracic vertebrae density. Here's a case where the radiographer uses scatter to gain an effect. By taking advantage of the scatter that occurs in a high kVp chest image, the radiographer is able to lower the contrast between the air-filled lungs and the dense bone of the vertebrae, where otherwise there would have been just black and white of bone and air. Instead, the image displays detail in vertebrae as well as lung markings and visible ribs from posterior to anterior ends. Okay? Now, back to the first question. What do the Detroit Red Wings, Timmy's time machine wheelchair, and conjoined fetal twin syndrome have in common? That's right! Absolutely nothing! It was just an exercise to get you think laterally because it's good for you. Here are some skill testing questions. All the answers are in the presentation except the bonus question. Good luck!